Welcome to the Piston Fanatic. I'm your host, Dave Dalton, and I am excited to share my passion and perspective of our Detroit Pistons as we go on this fantastic voyage together. I've been a diehard Piston fan since the days of Dave Bing and Bob Lanier. I've been a longtime head coach of a very successful varsity program in northern Michigan. Currently, my daughter and I are coaching one of the best AAU teams in the country. Got a lot of great topics to talk about today, including who's going to be the next head coach of our Detroit Pistons. We're also going to talk about Troy Weaver's extension, the current condition of our team, and past head coaches of the Pistons and current hiring trends that are in the NBA this year. So first we're going to talk about Troy. And Troy Weaver, there's talk that it was just announced that he signed an extension this summer. So it's interesting that he signed it this summer and we just are now hearing about it. About a week ago they announced it. So this summer there was a lot of optimism and excitement, and I think a lot of people were really thinking that we were going to be really a lot better than what we have been this year. And so who knows if that would have made a difference in whether he was signed to an extension or not. Personally, I do believe that Troy is deserving of the extension and that it was the right thing to do. So I think it's real important that you have some stability. I think it's real important that the general manager has, so Troy I think has 1 year left after this on his contract. So you don't want a lame duck general manager, because what happens, and it's happened, we've had a couple instances in Detroit history about recently that's happened. Joe Dumars was the general manager and he did a great job. He got us our that 2004 championship. But in my opinion, even better was the fact that we went to the Eastern Conference Finals 6 years in a row. And so that, I think, is what Troy has really said that his goal is, to have a sustainable team that is ready to go deep into the playoffs for a long period of time. So that was a lot of fun. And I know some people, they just want the championship. And that is hard to do. There's a lot of good teams out there, but it's just, I had this appreciation. So my first 20 years as a Piston fan, which started really in about 1969, as we went 20 years before we won a championship. We hardly in that time ever made the playoffs, and when we did, we were ousted right away. So, I have that perspective that I think might be different than some Piston fans. So Joe Dumars, he had that successful run, and then those players started aging, and he started trading them away, and he wanted to try to kind of not rebuild and not tear down and try to stay good. So he re-signed Ben Gordon, and Ben Gordon was for Chicago. He had a 60-some point playoff game against the Celtics. I remember he was an exciting player, but what Joe did was he was the only free agent, along with another guy that's escaping me right now. He shaved his head and he had no eyebrows, but he was a forward that could score and rebound, and he was fairly young. But those, deals were done out of kind of desperation, because he knew that the team was heading not in a good direction, so he tried to do the best thing that he could do. The other time it's happened recently is Stan Van Gundy. So Stan was a pretty good coach. I think, in my opinion, that time has kind of passed him by, and the NBA had kind of changed, and Stan didn't exactly change. His first few years, he kind of built a decent team with some guys, and then things started to unravel a little bit, and then Stan was desperate, so he made the big splash and signed Blake Griffin. The attendance was terrible, interest in the team was terrible, we weren't winning, and so he made that move out of desperation. So he had 1 year left on his contract after that year. And so, again, desperation. So he traded our first-round draft pick, which I think turned in for the Spurs into Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And he traded away Tobias Harris, who ended up being an all-star and is still a very good NBA player. And basically he traded away any good assets that we had. And that was, like I said, out of desperation. So immediately after the trade, I said the trade was a mistake, and you don't trade for a guy who is older and always injured and a max contract that still had lots of years left. And he did have that one amazing year for the Pistons. I can't deny that. He was all-star. He was really, really good. But the other years, just like I had predicted, he was injured. The team was going nowhere. We had no cap space. He took up a large chunk of our cap space. And by the end, the last year he played for us, he didn't even go inside the three-point line, and he didn't even seem like he tried that hard. But anyway, that was Stan's move. But Stan, I got to hand it to Stan. Stan's a genius, one of the smartest men in NBA history. Stan got that $10 million a year contract with the Pistons to be GM and coach. And then he had a year left. He got fired, so he collected $10 million to not do anything. And then he got hired a few years later by the Pelicans to a 5-year contract for a bunch of money, and he got fired after 1 year because he did not do a good job. So then he got hired as a TV analyst, and I'm sure he makes decent money doing that. So Stan has got paid a lot of money to not do much except announce on TV, and he does a decent job. And Stan's not the stupidest guy in NBA history. I'm not saying that. I say he's the smartest guy because he capitalized on every opportunity and made a lot of money. But my thing is, by giving Troy this extension, he can make moves, for the best interest of our team going forward into the future, and not just have to worry that, hey, we've lost. We've only won 23 games is the most we've won under Troy Weaver, and that's not good. But the reality is we are heading in the right direction. So I'm going to use an example. I have a good friend of mine, whose daughter just got married, and he's, like most parents, he is concerned about his daughter and her future, and they needed to rent an apartment, and so they were staying each in a place that was reasonably expensive, not bad, but it was a nice apartment, not a great apartment. So, but they wanted to get something nicer, so they got a nicer apartment, but it was very expensive. And the problem is when, if you have a dream of owning a nice home someday, and you rent and pay a lot of money in rent, and you just can't put money away to save, because to buy the home they want to, they both had student loans to pay off, I think. And so anyway, that's the same situation the Pistons are in. So you want to, and there are fans, and I hear about them, and I see them on social media. They want to win now. I hear smart people say, we just can't keep on trading away our veteran players, and we got to at some point throw in our chips in and try to win games. Well, I agree with that at some point, but this is not the point. This was never Troy's plan. At best was for next year. I think we actually got set back a little bit by Cade's injury. And so I think that, again, the situation we're in now, and I talked about it last episode, that we need to go in on the future. So having Troy here, he can now make moves with that extension and think about the future, and not just right now and worry about getting fired. So talk about Dwayne Casey a little bit. Everybody on different podcasts I hear say, well, yeah, Dwayne Casey, a lot of people know he has real value, and I think he's a tremendous person. I think he's a really good coach. I think he's been great for our young players. But there does come time when you need a different voice, and that you need somebody, especially, some's got to get improved on our defense. He's been with this group of guys, some of them for like 3 years, and our defense has not shown any signs of, we're near last on defense. So it's tough. Coaching is tough. I was a coach for 41 years, and you're easily criticized. Everybody knows more than the coach, and everybody has opinions that are different than what the coach does, and including me. And it's hard for Coach Casey. I read about Coach Casey and heard people talk about Coach Casey for a long time, and it was always about the respect that people had and what a good man he was, and that has been obvious, in his years at Detroit. He has handled himself with class and dignity. He certainly knows a lot about basketball. I do think that people say that, oh, he's great at developing players. Look what he did in Toronto. And my thing is, he's supposedly has this reputation for being great in Toronto, but he also has a reputation for playing veteran players and not young guys. So that's kind of, ironic that you can have those two different reputations. So he hasn't been bad for our young players. I think he's been slow. I wanted DUREN to start. I wanted DUREN to play more minutes a long time ago, and finally he's starting to do it. I give him credit for um, putting Sadiq on the bench and bringing him off the bench because that took a little bit of nerve. I like the way that he stayed with Killian. I wasn't, you know, as optimistic about Killian, and Killian struggled, but he stayed with him, and that seems to have proven to be a good move. And Killian has shown tremendous progress. So he's done a lot of things positive for our franchise. And like I said, he was coach of the year. He got coach of the year in Toronto. A week later, he got fired, and that just tells you all you need to know about coaching. It's just a very fine line, and it's a very fragile uh, profession to be in. So, and then what does Toronto do? They make a trade and get Kawhi Leonard for a year, and they hire Nick Nurse, who's an outstanding coach, and they win the championship, and then he gets hired by Detroit. Actually, this has happened in Detroit history. In 1976, we had a coach named Ray Scott who had a team, and they made the playoffs. Again, they didn't go far, but we hadn't had a decent team in forever. And Ray Scott was coach of the year, and he got one more year, and then we fired him. So then it also happened with Rick Carlisle. Rick Carlisle was the Piston coach, and he in 2001, 2002, he was coach of the year. He had a record of 100 wins, 64 losses, which is really good. Everybody respected him. He did a nice job. And so what do? We fired him. And the truth is, Joe Dumars had been working behind the scenes. I mean, they had Larry Brown signed to a contract within a week. So that of the firing. So that all that had been taking place behind closed doors prior to that. And so Larry Brown takes us to the championship, and then he's there for a while, and he gets fired, which there's a lot of things. Larry has proven to be hard to deal with, and he's I think really good for a short time, and then after that, he rubs people wrong. He kind of rubbed me wrong with a lot of his decisions too. Mehmet Okur was really good, and he wouldn't play him. I think that Darko, which he still wasn't good. He wasn't obviously good enough to be the number 2 pick, but he was better than the way that Larry Brown wanted him down on the block. I think it's funny, Darko would fit in perfect in today's NBA, but not in Larry Brown's NBA. And I think that really, just like we've seen with Killian, how fragile young players and coming from another country. And I think that Darko even had a really harder situation coming from where he came, and to the culture difference and being by himself, and then not getting to play at all. Well, Killian got to start right away, so that was a different situation. But so Stan Van Gundy, he won 46% of his games when he was here, and so far Dwayne Casey's won 34%. And it's not his fault. The team hasn't been good, but are there things, and is there a certain time when you have to make a change? And I think so. But it's happened in history. Mark Jackson was a good coach for the Golden State Warriors, and they won a lot of games. Steph Curry did not want him fired, and Klay Thompson, they wanted him to stay there, but they fired him, and they hired Steve Kerr, and they won 5 championships. So sometimes that does need, just that change makes a difference. I just remember Budenholzer with the Bucks through the playoff run when they won it 2 years ago. Everybody's saying, if they don't make it to the Eastern Conference Finals, he's going to be fired. So his job was that he's hanging by a thread, and then they win the championship. And sometimes in that there's luck in that. Like I said, we've seen that most years the team that wins it has benefited from their opponents having star players injured. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the trends in the NBA. Who is getting hired recently that's been successful? And you can't always go by trends. Each case is really an individual situation. But the reality is that right now there have been a lot of young guys that have been hired. And Will Hardy, that's the coach of the Jazz, he was with the Celtics. He was an assistant coach there for lots of years, and for 6 years, I think, even though he was that young. And he's exceeded expectations. And he was there, and he's done a great job in the NBA, and he's 34 years old. He looks like he isn't old enough to have his driver's license yet, but he has been outstanding. The Celtics hired M.A. Udoka, and he was a young coach with not, he was an assistant coach there for the Celtics, and he did a great job for the last year, made it all the way to the finals, and he got in trouble messing around, with people in the front office, and so he got fired. And those guys like Will Hardy, and this is a common thread with a lot of these guys. He was a video guy for Popovich in San Antonio. And we're going to talk quite a bit, we can't dismiss the Popovich coaching tree. His assistant coaches have been so successful. There's these guys that look like you would never expect them to be an NBA coach. They just look like normal guys off the street. And they work under Pop, and they become great coaches. And a lot of people over the years in sports, in all different sports, you see it happen. You see like people trying to hire coaches for the Patriots, that worked under Bill Belichick. And it's ironic that none of those guys have ended up so far being any good. People hire them, and then they just are a total flop most of the time in Detroit. We got to see that with Matt Patricia. So, but with Pop, it's the other way. It's unbelievable the track record that his assistant coaches had. And again, Will Hardy was one of those. And again, he just he was a video assistant, and he just slowly worked his way up. And now he's doing a great job. He coached the Spurs in the Summer League, and he's just Pop has done a great job. So there's other guys that Pop's had. Taylor Jenkins was an intern for the Spurs. He was an assistant for the Spurs. He coached their D-League team, and now he's coaching the Grizzlies. He's only 35 years old. He was an assistant for Budenholzer, who was one of Pop's assistants, who's been a great coach in the NBA. And he was his assistant for a while with the Hawks, and now he's hired with the Grizzlies. And the Grizzlies, it is even hard. They got Ja, and they have Jaren Jackson, and they have some guys, but it's just incredible how tough that team plays. And even last year, they were like 20-2 without Ja. And it's like, who are these guys? But I think Taylor Jenkins deserves a lot of credit, and he looks like he might be the guy that's a shoe salesman at Kohl's or something. But there's the guy, I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, but he was Billy Donovan's assistant at Florida, and now he's coach at OKC, and he coached their G League team. He is super young, and the Thunder have far out exceeded it. Everybody thought they were, they traded all their best players. Everybody thought this team is going nowhere, and so and they've just shocked everybody. They're about a 500 team, and everybody thought, oh yeah, they're just going to be tanking this year. Obviously, they have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who is one of the better players in the league, but still, he has been a phenomenal coach. And so now we're going to look at who the Pistons are going to hire. So there's, I think, a lot of speculation that possibly it could be current assistant coach Jerome Allen. He's 49 years old. He worked 6 seasons under Brad Stevens in Boston, and he was credited for helping Tatum and Smart and Jaylen Brown. And the only thing I have to ask is why he had 2 different chances. Brad Stevens, he worked for Brad, and then Brad got the GM job in Boston, and twice he has hired people lately. He's hired M.A. Udoka, and then he's hired the next guy that they hired. And so why didn't they hire Jerome Allen? So, who knows what the reason is. Jerome Allen could be a great coach. I know he's in our program, and he's been an assistant. So we'll see if that is who we hire. It's just hard to understand if he didn't get those other 2 jobs. Like Joe Mazzulla, they hired ahead of him too. He interviewed for the Jazz job, and they hired Will Hardy ahead of him. And so that just gives me some pause. Another option, which I don't think this will happen, but Quinn Snyder's out there, and he was the coach of the Utah Jazz, and they had the best record in the NBA at least one year. They were near the top in the West in multiple years. They had one of the best offenses. A lot of people I hear on social media talk about um, how Casey's offense is no imagination and very predictable and no creativity at all. Well, Quinn Snyder is the opposite of that. So Quinn Snyder's he's 56 years old, but he's great track record. He would demand a lot of money, so I don't know if that would factor into our decision. But his last 2 years there, he won 101 games, and like I said, he had the number one ranked offense. So I'm just going to throw out there, and I not thinking that there's any chance that this would happen, but I see there's two really good candidates in my opinion out there, and one of them is Becky Hammond, and Becky Hammond was head coach, assistant coach for Pop for a bunch of years, and Pop had her be his main backup when he got sick or hurt or got kicked out of the game. She ran the show. It was obvious that all the players there really respected her, and it was, I've just seen her talk. I've heard players talk about her and Pop talk about her, and it's just glowing reports, everything they have to say about who she is and how she handles people and players and how much she knows the game. So she coached in the G League, and her team that she coached for the Spurs G League team, and they won the G League championship, which, it doesn't really mean anything, but it does mean something. So, and then she got a job this first year coaching in the WNBA, and she coaches for the Las Vegas team that's affiliated with the Spurs, and they won the WNBA championship. So she certainly had nothing but success and nothing but reports. I know there's some people that may be hesitant to hire a woman, but I wouldn't be one of them. So the other guy, the guy that I think would be an excellent coach for the Pistons, his name's Johnny Bryant. He's 37 years old. He is currently the number one assistant for the New York Knicks. New York Knicks are starting to gel and starting to play much better. Their defense has turned into, again, one of the top defenses. So there's a lot of things that people can criticize rightfully about Tibbs, and he's hard on players, and he works them hard in practice, harder than they want to be. He coaches them harder than they want to be. He tends to play his starters just into the ground. And anyway, there's criticisms of him, but I can tell you there's one thing. When I went to a Boston Celtics game against the Pistons, when we had Chauncey and Rip and Ben and all those guys, and I was just blown away. I mean, I'm watching the Celtics play, and it's like we can't even hardly make a pass. And that was a championship team. We struggled for every shot. We may have even won the game, but it's just like you couldn't even breathe. The Celtics defense was so tough. And Doc was the head coach at that time, but the guy that was in charge of the Celtics defense was Tibbs. So obviously he knows how to coach defense, and he's acknowledged around the league for being one of the great defensive minds in the game. So we need that, and so whether Johnny Bryant can convey that to the Piston players, it would remain to be seen. But he also had a great reputation. He was in Utah with when Donovan Mitchell and Bogey was there, and he helped develop Gordon Hayward and even Burks. And so a lot of the players admired him. They thought when Quinn Snyder resigned, that he had a great relationship with Donovan Mitchell, and everybody thought that he might be the next head coach there. But then Donovan got traded, and so he didn't get hired. So he has the experience of coaching under a great offensive mind, Quinn Snyder, and he has the experience of coaching under a great defensive mind, Tibbs. He's 27. He's been a player development coach for some really good players, and they're really vastly improved. And that was his primary role even at first when he was with Utah. So I just think that would be a great hire. Becky Hammond or Johnny Bryant, I think, would be two great potential hires. So let's dive a quick into the games. I heard the guys on Bally Sports talk about how the last loss for the Pistons was so terrible, and it was maybe the worst loss of the season. We lost in overtime. We were up by 14 with 3.5 minutes to go, it seemed like there was no way you possibly could lose that game, and we did. So it was devastating, and I do know players need to win games, and I know that if you're in the locker room, you can't say this or that. But again, I can say, like I did the last episode, that was a great game, and that's the kind of games I love. We want to get in the have that 14% chance to get Wembanyama, or if we don't, we could get Scoot Henderson. And I'm really becoming high on one of the Thompson twins, Amon Thompson, and I think all three of those guys could be, you know, really transforming players for our franchise. So, but especially Victor. So that's really the reason I just think that game we played, here we played the Clippers, who are a really good team, and we played outstanding basketball, and it was lots of fun. We finally got over our third quarter problems, and we hang in there. We had, again, a 14-point lead. We had a lot of great performances, a lot of guys that shot the lights out. And even Bogey didn't have a great game. And we still were able to play good because Stu had a really good game. He was 8 for 10, scored 21 points, 3 for 4 on threes, 2 blocks, 7 rebounds. And so that, we got to see the young players. DUREN, 30 minutes, which I've been pushing for, 15 points, and he was 7 for 11, 12 rebounds, 7 offensive. And every episode I'm going to keep on saying offensive rebounds are just a huge, huge positive for any team in winning games. So Ivy had a decent game, not great. He was 4 for 11, but he had 15 points, but he had 8 assists, which is sensational. And Killian, he didn't shoot great. He was 6 for 17, but he had 18 points, 10 assists, 4 turnovers, but he still good game for him. And we shot really well on three-pointers. We shot 47%. We were shooting 60% partway through the third quarter on three, so we were really on fire. And it's hard to imagine that, that we had to have one great game to by a lot of people, and we still ended up losing. So, I mentioned when we won a game against Charlotte, and they're one of the worst teams in the league, and we won in overtime, and we had a bunch of guys shoot out of their mind, and we played against that mediocre team, and people were thrilled that we won. And so it's, again, I'm not saying that it's bad to win games. So, because I know, again, if you're in the locker room every night, you want to win. But I just think Piston fans need to look at the big picture, and if we can compete, and if we lose, it's not a bad thing, because we need to get that 14% chance, with Kate hurt, and we just, I just think that's the future. So that, again, I go back to, I mentioned before about trading Bogey, and a lot of people are saying we can't trade our veterans, and we at some point you have to just keep them and try to win. Well, I do think that we're going to win next year, but I do think that it doesn't make sense. I think it's been great that we've had him. I think that he's taught our players a lot. I think they've got to experience him in the locker room. They've got to receive instruction from him. They've got to watch how he plays and how smart he is. He's always communicating with his teammates. And so I think it's been a great experience. But, he is, we've had him for a half a year, and if we can get some value for him, again, I'm not a proponent of trading him for no value, but, we just, he takes up a lot of shots our younger guys aren't going to get to take. And he's 33. We got rid of Jeremy Grant. Jeremy Grant is 28, and we thought, oh, he's not in the timeline with our team, so we should trade him and try to get some younger assets, which we ended up doing. But Bogey's, 5 years older, and by the time we are competitive, which I think, we're going to win more next year, but it's the following year that I think that we have a good chance to make the playoffs, and then it'll be 3 years before we're able to, I think, go deeper into the playoffs. And so I think that's, he's not going to be around. Another thing I just want to say is, there's certainly a lot of value to having veteran players like Kojo. The truth is now, with Sadiq and Stu and Killian, next year that will be their fourth year. So it's not like they're on the cusp of being veterans. And so they've learned from, they've learned from Bogey, and they've learned from Burks, and they've learned from Kojo and Magruder. And so they've, been in the league, and now they can pass things on to other people. So I would say the bad losses, though, are, and very frustrating for me, is, when we lost by 20 to the Sixers and turned it over 22 times, and when we lost to the Hawks, and, we just didn't play that well. So against the Hawks, we had Bogey played 30 minutes and scored 23 points. He was 8 for 20, which is not great shooting. He's been shooting, about 50%. He was 2 for 7 on threes, and he didn't play great. And Stu played 28 minutes, 7 points. He was 5 for 7, 3 for 4 on threes. Again, his 2 for 4 on threes. His 3-point shooting has really been one of the big benefits that we're seeing this year. That's going to, I think, carry on into the future and make our team a lot better going forward. DUREN had another monster game, 28 minutes, 13 points, 5 for 7. Ivy didn't shoot great, but he had 15 points, and he was 4 for 5 on free throws, had 4 assists and 0 turnovers, which is great. Killian had, the team got, it was bad, against Atlanta, and we lost 130 to 105, but Killian was 7 for 10 from the field, 17 points and 5 assists, and Burks didn't have a very good game, and Sadiq had played 21 minutes and played 6 points and 1 for 5 overall, and 0 for 2 and 3 rebounds, 0 assists. So not a good game for Sadiq. In the last game he had 13 points. He played 26 minutes, but he was only 4 for 12. He was 3 for 6 on 3. So his 3-point shot is coming around. He's getting confidence. I still get disappointed. He doesn't get assists. And against the Clippers, he came down on a 2-on-1 break, and the defense came over towards him, and he could have dumped it to a guy for a layup, and instead he shot a contested one. I just think Sadiq has, when he gets the ball in his hands, he has one thing in mind, and that's to shoot the ball. So hopefully that can change. It was, again, heartbreaking. We were against the Clippers. They went on a 16-2 run to end the game, which is just so unlikely. We missed all of our shots. We turned the ball over. We were like 0 for 9 in the last 3.5 minutes, and so very disappointing. But not if you want to get that 14% chance. We played a great game. We played a great game, all except for 3.5 minutes, and then the overtime we weren't very good either. So, but still, that there's signs there of having a good team. So let's just keep our heads up, and I still look forward to every game. And I know I'm not like everybody, but I just do recognize that it is, we want to be good. We want to be really good. We don't want to just get to be like the Wizards and, some of these teams, or Indiana, and get, in the middle of the road where you're stuck winning, 35 to 45 games every year. And, I know we've lost so much lately that some of you probably would take that, but I think Troy does have a plan, and it is working, and I think it's going in the right direction. Does it guarantee anything? No, it doesn't. There's a lot of luck and a lot of things. We've gotten lucky. We got the first pick with Cade. We got lucky with that trade for JALEN DUREN, and we traded the Milwaukee Bucks 2025 pick, and we got the 13th pick in last year's draft, and we were lucky that Duren's available. I want to say a few more things about DUREN. People compare him to Dwight Howard. Well, there's obvious comparisons. They are both came into the NBA as teenagers. They both are built like, they look like men as teenagers, muscular. The differences I see is DUREN is much more skilled. If you watch, there was a game where they, after a timeout, got the ball to DUREN on top, and he bogey cut backdoor, and he threaded a bounce pass through the defense for an easy shot. His free throws are looking much better. They've shown tremendous improvement just during the course of the season. John Beilein said it's improving, and he likes his form, and I do too. And so I think that he is going to be a better shooter. He's going to be a better. Dwight Howard could never have made that pass that DUREN made even at the end of his career. So I just am real optimistic about him, and I think he has shown a lot of great things for our team going forward. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I know everybody's not going to agree with me, and I appreciate that. Everybody, again, we all have our own opinions, and we all can be right or we can be wrong. It just, it's fun. It's fun following the team. I know it's discouraging to be 8-27 or whatever we are and lose, especially when we get our butt kicked like we did against Atlanta and Philadelphia. But I had fun watching that game against the Clippers and seeing our young guys play really well. So thank you for listening. If you listen on Spotify, please leave a 5-star review. If you're listening on YouTube, subscribe, and it doesn't cost anything, and like it. Thank you to my wife Kelly for helping all the things that you do to make this podcast work, and my nephew Nathan. I hope you have a wonderful day. Do something nice for somebody today. Do something to make their life better, and we'll see you soon. Go Pistons.